Good afternoon to you. It's 4:07 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, 4:30. Why did the Biden administration lie to us to the tune of nearly 1 million jobs? Oh, we lost. We didn't really have that many. We overcounted. EJ Antoni joins us at 4:30 to describe how that happened. Sean Carney is here at 5 o'clock, the head of a group called 40 Days for Life. We'll talk to him about all the abortions that Democrats have committed outside of their convention this week. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL.
Niman Hama, Governor Tim Walz here. Happy Chinese New Year. This spring festival is a time to welcome and celebrate the new year with a smile and let the fortune and happiness continue. Please remember to practice social distancing and wear a mask as you celebrate. Gong hei fa zoi.
Oh, guy's such a nerd. But there you have Tim Walz, very close to China. He loves China. He's been there a lot. And it turns out he also has told high school students in the 90s, he said, China's got a great system, this communist system. It's like everybody's just sharing everything. Is that how it works? Here with more on that subject, the woman who exposed all of that, Alana Goodman joins us now. She's a senior investigative reporter for the Washington Free Beacon, and she joins us on the phone. Alana, good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
And I understand you're at the convention, aren't you?
I am, yes, unfortunately.
I'm sorry about that.
Terrible, but we'll get to that later.
We'll get to that. All right, so let's begin with Tim Walz. How cozy is this guy to communist China?
So this is interesting. So back in the early 1990s, he visited China as a 25-year-old. He was there right after the Tiananmen Square massacre. And after he returned, he went back to Nebraska, and he was teaching high school students there. And in one of his lessons, which I reported on in the Washington Free Beacon, he told the students that the Chinese communism system, quote, means that everyone is the same and everyone shares. The doctor and the construction worker make the same. The Chinese government and the place they work for provide housing and about 30 pounds of rice per month. They get food and housing, end quote. So a very rosy depiction of Chinese communism, very strange coming on the heels of him returning from China after the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Right, so he had the massacre as a frame of reference, and he still clung to this idea that the communist system is a laudable system and presented that to his students. We've learned, of course, that he's spent a lot of time there. They keep framing this guy as like your regular Joe from the Midwest, but I don't know a lot of regular Joes who have been to China 30 times, Alana.
Right, it's a lot of trips, and I think that this is also more concerning when you look at what he was saying in the context of that. So, as I said, he first traveled as a 25-year-old to China, and he wrote back at the time to his professor that he was being treated like a king. He said he was given the best apartment on campus with a color TV and air conditioning and tons of gifts, so many gifts. He said that he was not able to bring them all back with him to the United States. He said that as long as he lived, he did not think he would be treated this well again in his life. So it's in that context that he's coming back and teaching his students about China in this very flattering way. So, that obviously raises some concerns about what his views were at the time.
Yeah, sure. And there's nothing wrong, of course, with visiting China. There's all sorts of decent Americans who are experts on China, who've been there a bunch, who are learning about the country. That's great. But it is a little weird, I think, that he honeymooned there and his wedding anniversary is on the date of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Are those things true?
Right. So he specifically wanted to have his wedding on June 4th, which was the day of the massacre. This was a few years after it happened. He told his wife that he wanted to do that so that he could remember the date. And then they went on their honeymoon in
What?
China.
I didn't know that. That's demented. So remember the date for what reason? To celebrate it or to condemn it? Do we know anything about his judgment of it?
So that was a quote from his wife. She was quoted in a newspaper article at the time saying that they specifically chose to have their wedding on that date because he wanted a date that he could remember.
So Tiananmen Square was his frame of reference. So this is
Right.
I don't know a single person in my life who's like, I want to get married on September 11th so I can always remember my wedding date. That doesn't make any
Right.
sense to me.
Very strange, for sure.
That's super bizarre. Okay, so how has the Kamala Walz campaign talked about this issue? Have they raised this at all? Because it seems to me that most of the coverage has been like, oh, there's Tim Walz. He's so folksy. But I haven't heard much about the China stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't really addressed it. I think that there are some questions that he should answer on this. For example, after he came back from China, he ended up taking a lot of students to China to visit on multiple trips, kind of as these cultural exchange programs. And there are some questions about those trips. For example, reporting at the time said that they received some scholarships for these trips from the Chinese government. So there are questions on, how much Chinese government funding was provided to pay for these trips, and then also who organized them. It was reported also at the time that he had a friend in the Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry who helped organize some of these trips, and that probably would have been needed at the time for some of the places that they were traveling. So these are questions that we have yet to hear an answer from.
We have yet to hear an answer on them, but as I understand it, that there have been reporters who have put inquiries into the campaign and they've refused to answer the question. And that's deeply suggestive of the fact that these trips, at least in part, were indeed funded by Chinese communist interests.
It definitely raises questions, and I know the House Oversight Committee has opened up an investigation in this, so they're trying to get some more details on that.
Amazing. All right, so I guess we'll find out more. Now, if they were proud of it, if Kamala Harris's campaign was proud of it, oh look, this guy knows so much about China. He's a perfect asset. He's going to be great for the administration. They'd be telling us all about it. They're not telling us all about it, which tells
right. They're doing the opposite.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
That tells us a lot on its own. Okay, now the convention itself, what's it been like since you've been there, Alana?
I would say it's very high energy. I think that on the floor it has been very well produced, but it has been a total nightmare in terms of the logistics of things. I mean, there's been crazy lines. Delegates have walked away because these lines are 2 hours long to even get in, and with the security, no Wi-Fi. But from a TV perspective, everything looks good, and I think that is really what the Democrats are looking for with this convention. That's the important part. How does it look on TV? And that so far has been a success. But certainly in comparing the DNC with the RNC, which was last month, the logistics of the DNC are much, much worse, and people are having a hard time getting around here.
Sure. Although I am seeing, I mean, as I watch some of this, I am detecting some division that's even playing out on the television screen. Yesterday, there were 44 delegates who voted present rather than voting Kamala Harris. We're seeing images of Democrats who are trying to smash their way into the convention, who are pro-Hamas people who are trying to get in there. And then yesterday, the news that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz skipped town. They actually left the state during Barack Obama's address out of respect for Joe Biden's bitterness, was the reporting about the way that he was knifed by Obama and pulled out of the race. Are you detecting division on the floor there?
Yeah, I think that they have really been trying to downplay these protests that are happening outside, and we really haven't heard anything from the speakers on it other than Joe Biden, who said, the protesters have a point or something like that. But none of the other speakers have addressed these protests. They're happening right outside. Senator Chuck Schumer yesterday in his speech, he was talking about how he fights anti-Semitism, and this is the number one issue for him, and yet he didn't talk about any of these anti-Israel protests, some of which have veered into anti-Semitism, that are happening outside. So I think that's interesting. I think they're really just trying to downplay any sort of divisions in the party and put forward this image of unity behind Kamala Harris.
And then yesterday was day 2 of them attempting to get control of the schedule. And on Monday, it grew so out of control that Biden was barely able to speak on Monday evening. He, in fact, finished up well into Tuesday morning. Yesterday, it looked like they were able to get Barack Obama out virtually on time, a little bit of a delay to get him out there. How much is that playing a factor in everything you're witnessing there, that disorganization?
Yeah, I mean, I know there was some speculation about whether that was planned to have Biden speak late whenever, people on the East Coast had already gone to bed. I think it was just issues with the planning that happened on Monday. Yesterday was definitely, things were more on time, and hopefully they'll be able to get things under control where we have everything on schedule tonight. Okay.
And then finally, back on the topic we started on, Alana Goodman with the Washington Free Beacon. I know you mentioned that there's a congressional investigation that just kicked off this past week into Tim Walz's connections to China. What is that committee going to produce, if anything? Do you have a sense of what their work's actually going to entail?
So this is being handled by James Comer, who's the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, and he sent a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray this week that he was investigating Walz's connections to the Chinese Communist Party and connected entities, and to kind of see whether Walz was maybe susceptible to the Chinese elite capture, which is where the Chinese government tries to influence people who might be in influential positions in the U.S. And so that's what they're looking at. And I think they're trying to get some more information on that.
Okay. All right. Alana Goodman from the Washington Free Beacon, thank you for joining us, or as Tim Walz may say,
Gong hei fa zoi.
Good to have you with us. Thank you so much, Alana. Good to talk to you today.
Thank you.
I actually have no idea what he said there, but I figured it was a perfect ending. All right, let's go to the phones. On line 2, we've got Mike calling in from South Riding, Virginia. Mr. Mike, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hi, Vince. Good afternoon.
Hey there.
The thing about the Democrats whining about how Trump is a threat to democracy and that they're fighting to save democracy, well, which is a joke because they're the ones taking democracy away.
Right.
But as far as Trump goes, when they say Trump is a threat to democracy, not one of the reporters who don't work for the Democrat Party are smart enough to ask the question, how?
Sure.
No one
give me more
asked these
details.
people.
If you were to wake up from a coma and somebody was like, "Hey, one of these candidates is a threat to democracy," the question you might ask is, first of all, why are we talking about politics? I just woke up from a coma. But so long as you're responding, you'd be like, "Well, how are they a threat to democracy? What happened? What'd they do?" And they don't bother answering that question. And all they do is they gesticulate wildly, and they say he's a threat to democracy, or they'll say something like, "Oh, he threatened to be a dictator on day one." No, stupid. What he said was, you constantly call him a dictator, and he joked. He said, yeah, I'll do it for one day. I'll be a dictator for one day.
Right.
And these people are ridiculous, Mike. I mean, they don't bother with explanations because they don't think we're worthy of receiving them.
Well, I don't think these are all they're propaganda points.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you were to ask, if one reporter had the chutzpah,
Sure.
In Italian, how to say, how is he a threat to democracy? They'd be going, hamana,
Sure.
because it's just a Democrat Party talking point. And if you try to pin him down, people are going to say, wow, they can't even answer the question.
Sure. And you might ask some follow-ups too. You're like, was there any evidence that he's tried to remove people from ballots? Has he done that? Because that would be anti-democratic,
right.
wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That'd be rough. Well, maybe he tried to imprison his political opponent. That's pretty anti-democratic if he would do something like that. And you should sort of go down the list of the normal things we think of as anti-democratic, and we just assess like which party is responsible for that, Mike.
Right. In 1984, Orwell had the Ministry of Truth,
right,
where the truth was whatever they said it was, and up is down, black is white, that kind of thing. Well, they're saying he's a threat to democracy, and in reality, they're the threat to democracy, and it's just they're turning people into a bunch of trained seals.
I know.
It's just whatever they believe, whatever they're told, and they're not smart enough to even try to find out, even question what they're being told. It's just, oh, okay.
Well, but the truth is, too, they also deprive you of the vocabulary to confront it. That's part of this, too. So
exactly. That's all part of 1984, turning every word into a different meaning.
Yeah, it's everything. Like, so democracy, for instance, even talking about it in this way, like, obviously we live in a democratic system, but if you're being specific, it's a constitutional republic. And the fact that they don't say that is it's meant to deprive you of that bigger picture understanding of how the system is supposed to work. I mean, everything from like the way the cable networks in the early 90s established which party was red, which party was blue as they air it. It was meant to defray the notion that you would think of Dems as the commies. And so, okay, now Republicans red, Democrats blue, and we get stuck with that. It's the long game. They want to change the way you think about things, so you're not able to confront it when you deal with it.
Right. Well, the one thing Republicans, I don't know if it's a genetic defect, so to speak, but the one thing the Republicans just can't seem to understand is the Democrats play to win. And the Republicans are like, oh, well, we'll take the high road. Well, yeah, the high road doesn't do you any good when you get your butts kicked in elections.
Yeah, of course. And appeasing the team that doesn't play by any rules is a very stupid strategy for winning.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Republicans for years have had the attitude, oh, well, we just want the Democrats to love us, so we'll do whatever whatever will make them love us. And the Democrats laugh at them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what I think. Well, it's what I consider a very abusive relationship. It's never going to work. Mike, thank you. I appreciate the excellent call. Hey, coming up, I want to talk about another lie they told us. It turns out we have about 1 million fewer jobs than Biden and Kamala told us we had. How did that happen? EJ Antoni is the expert on the subject, and he joins us just moments away. Don't miss it. He knew this. He predicted this would happen. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 4:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, we'll talk to the president and the CEO of 40 Days for Life. Sean Carney is here as the Democrats run an abortion mill outside of their convention just to keep the theme consistent. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Well, Bidenomics is once again leading to misery. A report today that the federal government overestimated the number of jobs created in the U.S. economy by just 818,000 between April of last year and March of this year. There you go. So almost 1 million jobs don't actually exist that they claim did. How did this happen? How did they get that so wrong? EJ Antoni is here. He's an economist at the Heritage Foundation and the in-house economist of this fine program. EJ, good to talk to you again, sir.
Vince, thanks so much for having me again.
Okay, did you see this coming? I think you did.
Yeah, we've talked about it a few times. I mean, I wrote a piece in May, had another one in June, another in July, and another one recently just this month, talking about how all of the available data shows that the monthly job estimates we were getting month after month were just wild overestimations. And that's despite the fact that you get a jobs report 1 month, let's say in January, and then in February and again in March, you'll get revisions for the January number. And despite the fact that almost every single month was revised down by quite a bit during the 12 months that you just mentioned, despite that, it was still an overestimation, as you said, by over 800,000.
Amazing. So that's a first of all, why are the people who are doing the numbers even in charge if they have to correct to the tune of nearly 1 million over the course of a year? It seems like they got it wildly off. And in fact, the organizations that estimate the revisions here, even they undervalued what was going to happen. Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo anticipated a change of 600,000. J.P. Morgan Chase anticipated a change of 360,000, and here we are, well above 800,000 jobs revised down. Why are these people within the government in charge of pulling this data together and telling the rest of us about it?
Well, what's really interesting, I think, is that if you look at some of the reports from the Philadelphia Federal Reserve, for example, they also had huge downward revisions here. So it wasn't as if it's not as if essentially the people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics are in a vacuum here. They should have known better. And I think it's really interesting when we look at the last time they made these kinds of mistakes. In other words, when was the last time we had a annual benchmark with downward revisions this large? It was 2009, when the labor market was bottoming out in the depths of the Great Recession. And essentially what was happening, Vince, is conditions were deteriorating so quickly that the assumptions made by the bean counters at the Bureau of Labor Statistics didn't really make sense anymore in that economic climate. And so their estimates that they developed from those models and methodologies became wildly off. And of course, they were overestimating the number of jobs, and that's why they had to have those huge downward revisions. There's likely something very similar happening today. As just one example, the model that the BLS uses to try to estimate how many jobs are being created and lost by businesses being created and firms going out of business, that accounts for something like half of all the job gains we've seen over the last year. Here's the problem. In the post-pandemic world, a lot of the businesses that are getting started fail quickly, and even more of them never actually hire anybody. In other words, again, the assumptions we're making today, they may have made sense in 2019. They don't today. And frankly, the Labor Department at this point owes Congress and the American people an explanation of why the heck they haven't fixed anything.
Wait, are you telling me the government is not nimble and dynamic and responsive to a changing environment?
Well, only when it's politically advantageous to do so, I suppose. But, clearly right now, what's the advantage? There's none. But, if you think about it, what gets all of the news attention? The initial report.
Right.
What does not get much attention? The revisions.
Yes, and we keep seeing that. So they'll give us a rosy report, and then they revise it a month later, or in this case, an entire year's worth of jobs. We find out, no, actually, there were 818,000 fewer at least than we claimed. What does this mean for the overall economy? I know that one of the indicators that the Federal Reserve has been watching for is the more people suffer in the labor market, the higher the likelihood they might be able to drop those interest rates because, of course, it's normal people who have to suffer in order for the economy to get corrected. Also, what are the chances we're heading into a real recession or already are there?
Vince, I think there's a very good chance we're actually already in recession. We have a lot of economic indicators right now that are in the red. And the problem with when a recession begins is that just because you have 1 month of bad data, even if everything is in the red, that doesn't necessarily mean you're in a recession. You do hit those speed bumps. You get those blips on the radar. So you need several months worth of data with a very clear picture to say, okay, a recession began. So it's perfectly normal that recessions are backdated. In other words, we look back and say, okay, 5, 6, 7, 8 months ago is when the recession began. I say all that to say I think it's a very good chance we're going to look back and say sometime around August is when the recession began. Again, we have a lot of economic indicators that are already in the red. With today's benchmark, it's clear to see that the manufacturing sector has been losing jobs, not gaining them slowly, but flat out losing them. And if you add up not only all of the monthly revisions to the jobs numbers, but now throw in this benchmark as well,
yes,
you're looking at 1.2 million jobs we thought we had over a 12-month period that were never there. That's a third of all the job growth.
A third of all the job growth is fictional. Okay. So you just said manufacturing jobs, that the official numbers up until today were that there was some slight growth, when in fact we've actually lost manufacturing jobs. So if I understand you correctly, under Lunch Bucket Joe, we have lost manufacturing jobs in America over the last year.
Well, if we go all the way back to January of 2021, when Biden and Kamala took office, you still had a lot of factories, for example, that were closed because you still had these crazy COVID measures in place, especially in some of the blue states like New York or Illinois or California. So a lot of the manufacturing job growth that we saw in the first couple of years of this administration was simply just people being allowed to go back to work.
As Trump calls them, bounce back jobs.
Right. Congratulations. It's not illegal for you to work anymore. Don't be surprised then when people start working.
Yeah.
But what we have seen since January of 2023 is the manufacturing sector has lost over 100,000 jobs. So, that's over a year and a half ago. And again, we've lost that many jobs.
But I don't know. I've been watching some of this convention this week. They claim that they've created all sorts of jobs, that jobs are coming back to America, and it's thanks to Joe Biden's presidency. Are you telling me that the math doesn't math?
Well, what's interesting is if the jobs are coming to America, so are the workers, because it's not Americans who are getting the jobs. Like you mentioned in your interview with Tucker Carlson, it's not a matter of all of these Americans are working today. They've been losing jobs. We're basically turning the American labor market into a temp agency for foreigners at this point. And it was one thing when, going back to 2019, we were adding so many jobs that we were employing not just more Americans, but more foreign-born workers as well. That's one thing. You're growing the pie for everybody. Congratulations. Today, you're simply swapping one worker for another at best.
Yeah. So in the revisions today, do they delineate between native-born and foreign-born workers in those revisions? The 818,000 jobs we are now told didn't actually exist. Did they break that out at all?
No, this is a completely different data set, actually. So we're not going to get anywhere near that kind of granularity in terms of native-born versus foreign-born. That's also why, for example, we didn't get any kind of revisions today to the unemployment rate. You would expect, well, if all these jobs aren't there, shouldn't we see, the unemployment rate revised higher? It's a different data set, Vince, and that's why we don't see that crossover there.
Okay, and then on the part-time job question that I always ask you about, what does it look like right now in August of 2024 in an election year? How many people are working now in multiple part-time job capacity to make ends meet who weren't doing that before?
We're basically flirting with record highs at this point. So from month to month, we'll have 1 month where it goes up a little, 1 month where it goes down a little, but we're essentially holding now at record highs. And this is part of the reason why we have seen this huge disparity between the number of people actually employed and the number of jobs, quote unquote, that are out there. We count a full-time job and a part-time job equally in that total. And so as you have people who lose a full-time job and then they have to take multiple part-time jobs, what happens? The number of people employed hasn't changed, but the number of jobs actually increases. Ironically, what we would usually see as a sign of wealth is increasingly showing up as a sign of impoverishment.
Let me move to some Kamala Harris proposals that I want to bounce off of you. I wanted to get your impression on. This week, Kamala Harris reportedly is proposing a corporate tax rate of 28%. She wants to increase corporate taxes. What does that do to inflation, to the cost of goods? How does that impact the average American?
Well, the corporate tax rate essentially gets passed on fully to three different groups of people. So you'll have shareholders receive a lower rate of return. You'll have workers receive lower wage growth, but then you have customers who get higher prices. And here's where it plays into the inflation that you mentioned. If these firms are having to raise their prices, corporations are charging more to customers, that shows up in the metrics as more inflation. It might not be inflation in a strictly academic sense, but to the consumer, it makes no difference. He's still stuck paying more for the same stuff.
The government imposed inflation in the form of this corporate tax rate hike, which is why, I always think, as I said earlier this week, it's muddy to say, that the corporations received a bigger share of the tax cuts than the normal middle-class person. Okay, but you're paying less for goods when the corporate tax rates get cut, right?
And your wages are growing faster. I mean, the empirical evidence on this is crystal clear. And also, anybody saving for retirement, I don't care if you're a blue-collar worker with a pension plan or you're somebody who's got their own private 401k, whatever the case may be. If you're saving for retirement, I guarantee you have some money in stocks, and those stocks are not going to do as well when the corporate tax rate goes up. I mean, here's the irony, Vince. We talk about how we want to raise taxes on the rich and greedy corporations. When you raise the corporate tax rate, you end up hurting the American middle class.
Right, because those costs get passed on. Okay, so with Kamala Harris, it looks like she is also endorsing other elements of Joe Biden's recent budget proposal. That includes a tax on unrealized capital gains as income for those who with more than $100 million in notional value. Can you untangle this a little bit and what it means? So you've got unrealized capital gains are things that are valuable, but you haven't actually sold them, right?
Right. And here's the problem, Vince. Everything is worth what its purchaser will pay for it. Until the time of sale, it is pure speculation. So who the heck are you to tell me how much this is worth? Oh, and you're going to do it every December 1st, according to this proposal? Congratulations. You just assured a complete and total crash in prices across all asset categories at the end of every single year, because everyone knows that if we do this little charade where we have our sell-off and prices plummet, then everything will get evaluated by the IRS at a lower price, and therefore I won't owe as much in taxes. I mean, that's the kind of volatility, even if it's predictable, that you're going to introduce in the market with this. And furthermore, do we really want to have people being forced every year to sell off some of their portfolio in order to pay for these gains? And don't believe for 1 second that this is only going to tax the rich. They're starting at $100 million. You know what? The income tax started at the top 1% as well. And by, in literally just a few years, it hit almost all Americans. And even the tax rate on the poorest Americans was higher than the original tax rate was on the rich. So don't believe for 1 second that they're not going to come after the American middle class with this.
There is one area where it looks like Democrats are working really hard for their rich donors in blue states, though. I saw Chuck Schumer this week announce that he wants the state and local tax deduction caps to expire next year. Those caps were put in place with the Trump tax reforms, and in an effort to stop the blue states from leeching off of the rest of us. If those caps go away, won't that amount to a massive tax cut for rich Democrat donors?
That's exactly right. It's going to be a windfall to high-income earners in blue tax states. In other words, the Democrat donor class. I had a piece, Vince, I think it ran in Daily Caller, but I'm not positive. And I basically went through the numbers and showed, look, if you're a wealthy Democrat donor in a place like New York City, you're going to get a windfall for some of these folks of about $3 million a year. That's how much your overall tax burden is going to go down. Now, it's true that if we let the Trump tax cut expire, those folks' top marginal tax rate would go up, no doubt about it. But they save so much in terms of shrinking their taxable income because of that deduction that, again, it's going to save them literally millions of dollars a year.
Right. And what that means is they're not funding the profligate spending that's taking place in their state as a result of their voting behaviors.
Exactly. And who is paying for it? The American middle class. Because if you let the Trump tax cut expire, those are the folks who are going to pay more. And really, I make this mistake all the time. I keep calling it the Trump tax cut. It was really the Trump tax reform because, again, not everyone got their taxes cut. If you're one of those high-income earners in a high-tax location, you paid more in taxes.
Yes.
As you should. Why should everyone else subsidize you and your state's profligate spending?
Right, and you're trying to evade paying the taxes in the state that's spending outrageous sums of money. It's wild. All right, thank you very much, EJ Antoni, as always, for your clear-eyed analysis of everything economic. Thank you, sir. Good to talk to you.
The range of how many jobs they would take away for a variety of reasons, maybe the largest is the birth-death model for businesses, was going to be somewhere between 350,000 and 1 million. It comes in at 818,000.
A lot of jobs didn't actually exist that the Biden administration told us about. Donald Trump responding to this news in North Carolina today.
The new data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the administration padded the numbers with an extra, listen to this one, 818,000 jobs that don't exist. So they said they existed, and they never did exist. They built them up so that they could say what a wonderful job they're doing.
Everything bad heads in a worse direction. Did you also see the news that the Biden administration has lost track of 32,000 minors who have crossed our border? That is children who have crossed our border. Just no idea where they are, Meanwhile, Obama last night at the Democrat convention was saying that we can secure our borders without tearing kids away from their parents. Really? You're losing track of children in the country who are pouring across the border. That's what's actually going on. The bad stuff gets worse, huh? Okay, coming up, we're going to talk to Sean Carney. He's the president and CEO of 40 Days for Life. Democrats are bragging about the kill streak they've established just outside the Democrat convention this week. Sean will react to their abortion truck. We've got some thoughts on that ahead.